Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's one I've been looking forward to, the newest album from Alex Cameron called Miami Memory. You know, it's funny. I saw a tweet a couple days ago by someone who'd been watching my past couple reviews, specifically those of the Highwomen and Rhapsody, and then remarked that given my current upcoming slate of projects to come, the discussions of feminism and toxic masculinity was gonna surge to the forefront yet again. And to do any of my upcoming reviews properly, given my current docket includes JPEG Mafia, Chelsea Wolfe, and Jenny Hval, and eventually I will get to Tropical Fuckstorm, the political discourse, it kind of is inevitable. Now, granted, I'm not going to deny that it can be dense or draining or frustrating. I've seen the subscriber drop off after certain more political reviews. So look, I get it, especially given that I don't tend to be as funny as your average critic or left-wing commentator who can lean into the memes or wittiness alongside the analysis. But hey, you know what? This could be a decent test, given how the artist himself has always embraced some of the more parodic side of his work. Alex Cameron. Now, I'll be honest, the fact that he has used his cult following and is inflated the way it has, it's a real treat to see. I was kind of lukewarm on his debut album, but by the time I got to Forced Witness a couple months late, I was astounded how much wit, melodic flair, and dissection of traditional masculinity was wedged into his retro 80s soft rock sound. I still find that album as an absolute delight, and one of the sleeper best of 2017. And in retrospect, it has only grown on me since, especially the more anthemic cuts. And I'll admit a certain wry fascination with Alex Cameron. His shambling theatricality, his blend of pop sounds, and willingness to embrace satire that most guys will not have the balls to truly seize, all with a real earnest intensity that I have to respect, to the point where it should surprise nobody that he's dating Jemima Kirke, who you might recognize as Jessa from HBO's Girls. So for me to say that I was excited for Miami Memory was a bit of an understatement, even if he did have a real tough act to follow. So, okay, what did we get? Oh man, I want to love this. I really did. Alex Cameron seemed to have everything set up to stick the landing with Miami Memory, transitioning from writing from the overstuffed machismo of Forced Witness to something a little bit more grounded in his own perspective, and the genuinely love-struck feeling while still remaining conscious. And yet, I'm just not as gripped or moved as I was by the best moments of Forced Witness. It is absolutely good, and at some points comes damn close to being great, but the frustrating thing is that it's not really a factor of the writing so much this time around as it is the presentation. Hell, Alex Cameron is still drawing upon the same palette of mid-80s soft rock schlock, but the tonal choices, they just aren't as delivering of the scope and swell that play to his strengths, even if they are closer to his last album than some detractors of this project will admit. Again, it is good, but I really wanted this to be great. Now, granted, the most immediate shift comes through the vocal delivery and the affectations that Alex Cameron is embracing this time around. The usual parallel that many made for Forced Witness was Springsteen, but I know someone pulling from the canon of John Parr, Eddie Money, and mid-80s Meat Loaf probably more than I should. But at this time, you can tell that Alex Cameron is testing his vocal range further, pulling less from mid-80s MOR soft rock machismo to some of the schmaltzier side you hear from Billy Joel in that era, and it's a little bit more ornate and arranged. The 80s Meat Loaf parallel hasn't gone away, but maybe complemented with some splashes of Don Henley, Chicago, Steely Dan, or even the Cutting Crew along the way. Hell, some of those backing vocals, Far From Born Again, it would fit right into Billy Joel's 80s catalog. But of course, this comes with a risk, because Alex Cameron has never really been a powerful singer, but the husky swagger makes sense in rock music where charisma can override a lot of raw vocal talent. But if you ramp up the glossiness of the production with the flashier keyboards and the brighter theatricality, his vocal shortcomings are a little more evident. I might appreciate the blaring new wave synths on Stepdad, later revisited with Righteous Brothers-esque bombast in the composition on Too Far, but it's also hard not to wince at how sharp he comes in on that hook, and while he's doing his damnedest on Other Ladies against the seedy organ and the richer female backing chorus, that brand of singer-songwriter blue-eyed soul, it's just out of his range. I hate to say it, but it's kind of true. And yet, if we're looking for an issue with the sound of the album, it becomes that added layer of polish and drawing sharper comparisons to the acts of that era. Part of the untold genius of Forced Witness is that if you were familiar with the also-rans and the one-hit wonders of mid-80s soft rock and MOR rock, the sonic palette that Alex Cameron was drawing upon, it felt familiar with the canned chintzy production, the drum machines, the seedy keyboards, and let's not forget Roy Malloy's saxophone. But it still had strong enough hooks to convince you that his chops were good enough to shine through. And for those people unfamiliar, on sound alone, they'd probably just assume he was some forgotten act of the era. Exactly what he wanted to construct that verisimilitude. But go a cut like the title track here, and while the piano line, the gummy synth gloss, the flutes, and the subtle guitar rollick, it could have placed in the same era, that blocky roiling drum machine doesn't seem to match up, and it pulls you out of the experience. All the sounds are contemporaneous of the era, sure, but they don't quite gel together in the same way. And instead of sounding like a product of the time, it feels like a clumsier imitation than it should. Similar case to the let-in groove behind the acoustics and fluttery gloss of Gaslight, or how abrupt the seediness cuts to the front of PC With Me, which just feels a little awkwardly short, a little more theatrical than it should. But the larger problem is that even songs that click can't but feel a little bit smaller than the dusty sweep of Forced Witness. And part of that was inevitable by going smaller and more human and more realistic to him, for lack of better terms. There's less of a need for satirical broadness, and Alex Cameron is a good songwriter to make a workaday normalcy of Far From Born Again note perfect, with that scene with the harmonica and the isolated clap, make Bad for the Boys sound imported from the regular bouncy rollick of jaunty Heartland rock, and then really work that Don Henley comparison on End Is Nigh. But even in the last case, you all have to have the swell to make a truly epic tune, and it's cut short before it can really take off. Not the first moment where it feels like the lyrical ideas were just cut a little short across this album. The songs were willing to really explode, but the compositions don't quite push all the way there. And yet while we're here, let's talk songwriting. By far the biggest draw for me for Alex Cameron, and where I was intrigued how his relationship with Jemima Kirke opened up to a more honest POV. And what we got, well, it's quintessentially an Alex Cameron album in its unique brand of overcompensating awkwardness and razor-sharp insight, only this time around a little bit more love-struck and likely gonna overthink all of it into the ground. Like Forced Witness, there's an element of genuine male desperation and insecurity, but the framing has subtly shifted, less from embodying that asshole to the uncomfortable reality, and how in so many modern relationships, it's so damn easy to wind up in that asshole position, even if you don't want to. Stepdad is a prime example, with all the overcompensating grubbiness that would come from a step-parent trying and failing to make it work, as the relationship might even collapse around him, anchored in the same pathetic insecurity that drives a cut like Gaslight, which never makes him sympathetic, but highlights exactly how a nice guy might utilize such manipulative tactics. But hell, even when it seems like he is doing everything right, within reason, as some of the trashier but instantly recognizable details of PC With Me highlight, on that song, she still wants him to tread into slightly more dangerous waters. And there's that subtle push and pull across blurry lines that gives the album its human drama, and yet it's not these songs that feel like they work the strongest. Hell, songs like Far From Born Again with the blunt, pro-sex worker and porn message, and Bad for the Boys tearing into hyper-masculine and yet exploitative archetypes that feel the most self-contained and punchy with their insight, probably some of my favorites here, maybe a little bit too transgressive for your average audience, but they're certainly in the right direction. I like these songs. They're in the same wryly self-assured ballpark that's worked for acts like Idols, but you can also tell they're not the emotional focus. So instead you get the quasi-drunken breakdown approaching AA in the face of the apocalypse on End Is Nigh, or the eminently pathetic prostration of loyalty on Other Ladies that on some level we all know is complete bullshit, especially when it's preceded by the nastiness coming in on Divorce. But if Alex Cameron is drawing on something that's genuinely love-struck with Miami Memory, it's one where the oversharing never stops, and the flaws in his partner can't stop rearing in his head, as if he can't just stop rewriting Billy Joel's She's Always a Woman, which is why I absolutely love how this album ends with Too Far, as he can't help but feel some type of way about the ex that can never leave her mind, and yet he gets it. It almost feels a little bit like To Be With You by Mr. Big, where he recognizes that he might be only one in the long line of guys that will be with her, and in a moment, He knows his exit strategy, but he also recognizes how his overthought expression of love is just as jealous and pathetic as the ex that always seems to be in the corner of his eye. Once again, rooting the themes in the album and confronting his insecurity really over her. She's fine. And by the end, finding security and confidence in himself. And that is a tougher revelation coming off of Forced Witness, where he could manufacture some distance with the satire, but Miami Memory, the uncomfortable reality of his own weaknesses, they're much closer to home. And that's something he's got to process and deal with, and ultimately he does come out in the right. And yet, man, I wish the music came together to match it a little bit better. That's the exasperating thing about Miami Memory, because like with his last album, the writing is genuinely excellent. A little bit more scattered this time around, sure, but as a whole, it does kind of come together, but the seams of the songs feel a lot more visible, the hooks aren't quite as punchy, and as a whole, they feel less sure of themselves. Kind of understandable given the emotional focus of the content, but you'd think the fragmentation wouldn't carry over to that point of execution. But again, I still really like this, and I appreciate Alex Cameron's role in modern indie rock and pop, which is why I'm giving it a very strong 7 out of 10 and absolutely recommendation. This is sharp stuff, and if there's a guy for which my wish of love and happiness can tightly mirror my own, it really is Alex Cameron. Best of luck, my man. Best of luck and love. Or hell, either way. We both know how it goes. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Again, this is one of those albums I really wanted to love, but didn't quite get there, but I really do want to support the guy. So if you want to buy or stream his music, links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where the fans are going to fall on this, because I don't think it's going to get quite the same acclaim as Forced Witness, but you never know. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you're looking for new episodes of Billboard Breakdown or more reviews, links in the card right over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.